Which one of you men is Forbes?
I am, sir.
Justification for shooting?
The Detectives wasn't supposed to be gritty. It was supposed to be safe, polished, primetime, perfect. But behind the badge and the black and white footage, nothing went as planned. The star hated television. The scripts were rewritten hours before filming. In one episode, it got so dark the network buried it for decades. These are 20 weird facts about the Detectives. This case is about to get complicated. Robert Taylor didn't want to do television. He was a movie star, a golden age Hollywood leading man who'd spent 2 decades commanding the big screen opposite Greta Garbo, Barbara Stanwyck, and Ava Gardner. Television was beneath him, or so he thought. But by 1959, the studios were changing. The contract system was dying. Movie offers were drying up, and Taylor's agent delivered the news he didn't want to hear. TV was the future, and he needed to get on board or get left behind. When the offer for the Detectives came through, Taylor read the pilot script in his Beverly Hills study and tossed it across the room. He called it pedestrian, formulaic, cop show garbage. But the money was extraordinary, and the creative control clause, it gave him something movies never had: final say on scripts, directors, and casting. So Taylor signed, but not because he believed in it. He signed because he was pragmatic, because Hollywood had moved on, and because deep down, he knew the era of the movie star was ending. What he didn't know was that the Detectives would consume the next 3 years of his life, redefine his career, and prove that television, for better or worse, was exactly where the future lived. The show was originally pitched as an anthology series, not a procedural. In the late 1950s, networks were obsessed with anthology formats like Playhouse 90 and The Twilight Zone, standalone stories with rotating casts and high drama. The Detectives was supposed to follow that model, each week focusing on a different detective in a different precinct, solving crimes with no recurring characters except the city itself. But when Robert Taylor signed on, everything changed. The network wanted star power every week, not just cameos. They wanted audiences to tune in for Taylor, to follow him case after case, to build loyalty around his character, Captain Matt Holbrook. So, the format flipped. What was meant to be an experimental anthology became a traditional cop procedural, and Taylor, who'd hoped for creative variety, found himself locked into the same role week after week. He later admitted he felt trapped, playing a character who rarely evolved, delivering lines that sounded identical from episode to episode. The anthology concept still lingered in occasional standalone episodes, experimental one-offs that felt different from the usual rhythm. But by then, the damage was done. The Detectives had committed to formula, and Taylor, despite his star power, despite his control, despite everything the contract promised, was stuck playing the same man, solving the same crimes in the same dim squad room until the show finally ended in 1962. The show's lighting was deliberately harsh, almost oppressively dark, and it wasn't an accident. Cinematographer Reggie Lanning, a veteran of film noir and B-movie westerns, was brought in to give the Detectives a visual edge that other cop shows didn't have. He used high-contrast lighting, deep shadows, and minimal fill light, techniques borrowed directly from 1940s crime films. The network executives hated it. They said it looked cheap, murky, hard to watch on small black and white TV screens. They wanted brighter sets, clearer faces, something that felt more like Leave It to Beaver and less like Touch of Evil. But Robert Taylor loved the darkness. He fought for Lanning's vision, arguing that crime wasn't clean, wasn't bright, wasn't meant to be comfortable. The shadows stayed, and something strange happened. Viewers responded. Critics praised the show's visual sophistication, calling it cinematic in a way most television wasn't. The darkness became the show's signature, influencing later series like Naked City and even early episodes of The Twilight Zone. But it came at a cost. Some affiliates refused to air episodes, claiming the image quality was too poor for their markets. Sponsors complained that their products looked grim in commercial breaks, surrounded by such oppressive visuals. And Lanning, despite his innovation, was eventually replaced midway through the second season by a more conventional cinematographer who brightened the sets and softened the shadows. The Detectives never looked the same again, and Robert Taylor never forgave the network for compromising what he considered the show's soul.
How's the boy? Bad. Bullets to the chest.
One of the most notorious episodes, titled The Rope, was so violent that it was pulled from syndication for over 30 years. In the episode, Captain Holbrook investigates the murder of a young woman who was strangled with a clothesline. The script, written by Sterling Siliphant, who would later win an Oscar for In the Heat of the Night, didn't hold back. It showed the crime scene in graphic detail, bruises on the victim's neck, torn clothing, implications of sexual violence that were almost unheard of on 1959 television. The network's Standards and Practices Department flagged it immediately. They demanded cuts, rewrites, a sanitized version that would play safe. But Robert Taylor refused. He believed the episode captured the reality of violent crime, the ugliness that detective work actually confronted. He threatened to walk if they censored it, so the network aired it once, late at night, with minimal promotion. And the response was swift. Sponsors pulled ads. Affiliate stations received complaint letters. Parents groups called it irresponsible, exploitative, too adult for primetime. The episode was quietly shelved, never rerun during the show's original syndication cycle, and effectively disappeared from public view. It wasn't until the 1990s, when The Detectives was repackaged for classic TV networks, that The Rope resurfaced. And by then, what had seemed shocking in 1959 felt tame compared to modern crime dramas. But the damage had been done. One episode, one refusal to compromise, and a piece of television history was buried for decades. Robert Taylor insisted on doing many of his own stunts, despite being in his late 40s and suffering from chronic back pain. He'd been injured years earlier while filming Ivanhoe, a horse riding accident that left him with a compressed disc and recurring spasms. Doctors warned him that physical stunts, especially fight scenes and falls, could worsen the injury permanently, but Taylor didn't care. He believed audiences could tell when a stunt double was used, that the illusion broke the moment the camera cut away from his face. So, week after week, he threw punches, dove through windows, tackled suspects, rolled down stairs. The crew watched in silent horror as Taylor grimaced through takes, popping pain pills between scenes, icing his back during lunch breaks, refusing to slow down. In one episode, he insisted on performing a rooftop chase sequence that required jumping between buildings, a 4-foot gap with nothing but a crash mat 3 stories below. The stunt coordinator begged him to let the double handle it. Taylor refused. He made the jump, landed hard, and crumpled immediately. Production shut down for a week while he recovered, but when he returned, he didn't apologize, didn't acknowledge the risk. He just went back to work, performing his own stunts until his body literally couldn't take it anymore. By the 3rd season, Taylor was finally forced to accept stunt doubles for most physical scenes, but the damage had been done. He would live with chronic back pain for the rest of his life, a permanent reminder that television, despite being smaller than movies, was just as brutal. The Detectives had an unusual relationship with real law enforcement, often blurring the line between fiction and documentary. The show employed active duty LAPD detectives as technical advisors, and occasionally they'd bring real case files to the writer's room. One advisor, Detective Sergeant Bill Parker, became so involved that he essentially co-wrote several episodes, contributing not just procedural accuracy, but actual dialogue pulled from interrogations he'd conducted. Some episodes were barely fictionalized versions of real crimes, names changed, but details intact. The network loved it, marketing the show as authentic and ripped from the headlines decades before Law & Order made that phrase famous. But it created ethical problems. In one instance, an episode about a jewelry heist mirrored an ongoing investigation so closely that defense attorneys argued their clients couldn't get a fair trial because potential jurors had been exposed to incriminating details via primetime entertainment. The case was nearly dismissed. Another episode featured a murder confession that lawyers claimed was based on a real interrogation that had been ruled inadmissible in court. The LAPD quietly pulled their advisors from the show after that, and the Detectives was forced to add disclaimers stating that all stories were entirely fictional. But Robert Taylor was furious. He'd believed the authenticity was the show's greatest strength, that viewers wanted reality, not sanitized TV fantasy. Without real cases to draw from, scripts became more formulaic, more predictable, and Taylor grew increasingly disengaged from the material, phoning in performances during the final season simply because the stories, in his view, had lost their truth.
Which one of you men is Forbes?
I am, sir.
The show's theme music, a brassy, urgent jazz composition, was nearly rejected because network executives thought it sounded too black. In 1959, jazz was coded as black music, associated with urban nightlife, bebop clubs, and cultural spaces that white middle America found threatening. The original composer, Pete Rugolo, who'd arranged for Stan Kenton and worked extensively with black jazz musicians, delivered a score that was sophisticated, propulsive, and rhythmically complex. When the network first heard it, they balked. One executive reportedly said, "This sounds like something you'd hear in Harlem, not primetime." They wanted something safer, more orchestral, more traditionally cop show brass and strings. But Robert Taylor, who'd become an unlikely jazz fan after spending time in Los Angeles clubs during the 1950s, fought for Rugolo's music. He argued that the theme needed to reflect the urban energy of the show, the grit and danger that defined detective work. After weeks of debate, a compromise was reached. Rugolo's composition stayed, but certain syncopated sections were smoothed out, made more palatable to conservative audiences. The final theme retained its jazz roots but lost some of its edge, a watered-down version of what could have been a genuinely groundbreaking TV score. Rugolo was disappointed but not surprised. Years later, he admitted that network television in the 1950s wasn't ready for authentic jazz, that the medium was too afraid of alienating white suburban viewers who controlled the ratings. The detective's theme remained distinctive, memorable even, but it was a ghost of what it could have been. One actor, Teague Andrews, who played Lieutenant Johnny Russo, wasn't supposed to be a regular cast member. He was hired for a single episode, a throwaway role as a detective helping with a case. But during filming, something clicked between Andrews and Robert Taylor. Their chemistry was undeniable. The way they played off each other, finished each other's lines, created a rapport that felt lived in and real. Taylor lobbied the producers to bring Andrews back, not as a guest star, but as a permanent member of the squad. The network hesitated. Andrews wasn't a name, didn't have Taylor's star power, and adding a regular cast member meant splitting screen time, reducing Taylor's dominance in each episode. But Taylor persisted. He argued that the show needed ensemble energy, that detective work was collaborative, and that his character couldn't carry every scene alone. So Andrews was upgraded to series regular, and for the next 2 seasons, Lieutenant Russo became as essential to the detectives as Captain Holbrook himself. But behind the scenes, tensions emerged. Andrews wanted more storylines, more character development, more episodes centered on Russo rather than Holbrook. Taylor, who'd fought to keep Andrews on the show, began to feel threatened by his co-star's ambition. By the 3rd season, Andrews' screen time had been quietly reduced, his character pushed to the background, relegated to procedural exposition and reaction shots. When The Detectives was canceled in 1962, Andrews moved on quickly, eventually landing a starring role in the Mod Squad. But he never forgot how The Detectives ended, how quickly partnership could turn into competition.
Suddenly he pulled out of the shadows.
The show filmed many exterior scenes on actual Los Angeles streets without permits, because the production budget couldn't afford to close down city blocks for controlled filming. Instead, director of photography Reggie Lanning developed a guerrilla filmmaking style, using handheld cameras, natural lighting, and quick setups to capture footage before police or curious crowds shut them down. Robert Taylor would step out of a nondescript van, film a walking scene on a busy sidewalk with real pedestrians in the background, and disappear back into the vehicle before anyone realized what was happening. Sometimes, crew members posed as tourists to divert attention while the camera rolled. Other times, they'd film through car windows or from across the street, making it look like surveillance footage. The technique gave the detectives a documentary realism that other shows lacked, a sense that these crimes were happening in a real city, not on a studio backlot. But it was also dangerous. In one instance, Taylor was filming a chase scene through an alley when actual LAPD officers arrived, responding to reports of a suspicious man running through private property. Taylor had to produce identification and explain that he was filming a television show, not committing a crime. The officers laughed, asked for autographs, and let them continue. But after that incident, the production was more careful, securing at least minimal permissions before filming in public spaces. Still, the guerrilla spirit remained. And some of the detectives' most memorable moments were captured not through careful planning, but through quick thinking and borderline illegal filmmaking tactics. Robert Taylor's personal life began unraveling during the show's run, and his emotional state bled into his performance in ways that made the detectives darker and more haunted than intended. Taylor's marriage to actress Ursula Thies was deteriorating, strained by his long hours on set, and his growing dependency on alcohol to manage his chronic pain. Friends noticed he was drinking between takes, showing up to work hungover, delivering lines with a distracted, hollow quality that wasn't scripted but felt disturbingly real. In several episodes from the second season, you can see it. Taylor's eyes look exhausted. His voice carries a weariness that transcends acting. He wasn't playing a tired detective. He was a tired man pretending to be a detective, and the line between performance and reality had blurred completely. The crew knew something was wrong, but no one confronted him. Taylor was the star, the boss, the reason the show existed. Questioning him felt impossible, so they worked around it, scheduled his scenes for later in the day after he'd had time to sober up, used tighter close-ups to hide his bloodshot eyes, and hoped audiences wouldn't notice. Most didn't, but for those paying close attention, Robert Taylor's Captain Holbrook became something unintended, a portrait of a man barely holding himself together, investigating crimes while his own life fell apart. It was raw, it was human, and it was completely accidental. The show's most controversial moment didn't involve violence or language, it was silence. In an episode titled The Waiting Room, Captain Holbrook interrogates a suspect for nearly 7 minutes with almost no dialogue, just long pauses, stares, the sound of a clock ticking. Robert Taylor insisted on the scene, believing real interrogations were about patience, about letting silence do the work. The network hated it. They said viewers would change the channel, that television couldn't sustain dead air. But Taylor refused to cut it. When the episode aired, something unexpected happened. Phone calls flooded the network, not complaints, but praise. Viewers said it was the most tense thing they'd ever seen on television. Critics called it Hitchcockian, and suddenly, silence became a tool other shows started using. The Twilight Zone experimented with wordless sequences. Alfred Hitchcock Presents stretched quiet moments longer. One 7-minute scene changed how television thought about pacing, proving that sometimes the most powerful thing an actor can do is absolutely nothing. The show employed real criminals as extras and consultants, paying them under the table for their expertise. One advisor, a recently paroled safecracker named Eddie Marino, taught the props department how to actually pick locks on camera. No fakery, no tricks. Another consultant, a former con artist, coached actors on how to lie convincingly during interrogation scenes, teaching them the micro-expressions and body language of deception. The arrangement was kept quiet because the network would have shut it down immediately, but Robert Taylor believed authenticity required learning from people who'd lived on the other side of the law. In one bizarre incident, Marino was arrested on set during filming when a visiting detective recognized him from a prior case. Production halted while lawyers sorted out whether Marino had violated parole by being in Los Angeles. He hadn't, but the optics were terrible. After that, the show stopped publicly acknowledging its criminal consultants, though they remained on payroll through the final season. Ghosts teaching actors how to play cops by showing them how criminals actually think. An entire episode was filmed but never aired because the ending was too bleak. In The Last Door, Holbrook investigates a child abduction case that ends not with rescue but with the discovery of the child's body. The final scene showed Taylor standing in the rain at a cemetery. No dialogue, no resolution, just defeat. Test audiences were devastated. Some walked out. The network received angry preview cards demanding the ending be changed. But the episode was already edited, already scored, already complete. Rather than refilm, they shelved it. For years, it existed only in the studio vault, a lost episode that cast and crew would mention in interviews, but audiences never saw. When The Detectives was eventually released on DVD in the 2000s, The Last Door was included as a bonus feature. Modern viewers found it powerful, haunting, ahead of its time. But in 1960, television wasn't ready for stories where the detective fails, where evil wins, where there's no comfort in the final frame. So, the episode stayed buried, a reminder that not every truth can be broadcast. Robert Taylor's stunt double, Chuck Robertson, appeared in more episodes than most credited actors, but was never officially acknowledged. Robertson had doubled for John Wayne, worked on dozens of westerns, and could mimic Taylor's walk, his posture, his physical mannerisms perfectly. In wide shots, chase sequences, and fight scenes, it was usually Robertson, not Taylor, doing the work. But network rules at the time didn't require crediting stunt performers, so Robertson remained invisible. He was paid well but anonymously, a ghost doing dangerous work, while Taylor received all the glory. Years later, after Taylor's death, Robertson gave an interview revealing just how much of the detectives he'd actually performed. He estimated that in some episodes, particularly during Taylor's back injury recovery period, he was on screen more than Taylor himself. The revelation shocked fans who'd believed they were watching their star hero every week, but Robertson wasn't bitter. He said doubling for Taylor gave him steady work during lean years, that anonymity was part of the job. Still, it raised uncomfortable questions about authenticity, about who really deserved credit, and about how much of what we see on screen is carefully constructed illusion. The show's writer's room was notorious for all-night sessions fueled by coffee, cigarettes, and creative desperation. Scripts were often finished hours before filming began, pages delivered to actors still warm from the mimeograph machine. One writer, Robert Lewin, later admitted that some episodes were written in a single overnight marathon. No sleep, no breaks, just adrenaline and deadline panic. The quality varied wildly. Some episodes felt sharp, innovative, genuinely groundbreaking. Others were derivative, rushed, barely coherent. Robert Taylor grew frustrated with the inconsistency, demanding rewrites that slowed production and drove writers to exhaustion. Several quit mid-season, unable to sustain the pace. Others stayed but turned to amphetamines to keep up, a common practice in 1960s television writing rooms. The pressure created some of the show's best work, but also burned out talented people who might have had long careers if the system hadn't chewed them up. The Detectives was a factory producing weekly content with little regard for the human cost, and the scripts, brilliant and terrible in equal measure, reflected that chaos. One episode featured an uncredited appearance by a young actor who would later become a massive star, Dennis Hopper. He played a junkie informant in a brief scene, strung out, desperate, barely recognizable under heavy makeup. Hopper was still years away from Easy Rider, still hustling for any work he could get. Robert Taylor barely acknowledged him on set, treating him like background talent, not a fellow actor. Years later, after Hopper became famous, journalists would ask him about the Detective's appearance. Hopper's response was always the same, bitter and honest. He said Taylor was cold, dismissive, represented everything wrong with old Hollywood, the entitlement, the arrogance, the refusal to see young actors as equals. The resentment never faded. When Taylor died in 1969, Hopper declined to comment, a silence that spoke volumes. That brief scene, barely 2 minutes of screen time, captured a generational divide, old guard versus new wave, a collision that defined 1960s Hollywood, and neither man ever forgot it. The show's cancellation wasn't about ratings. The Detectives was still pulling decent numbers in its third season, competitive with other crime dramas in its time slot, but Robert Taylor was done. His back pain had become unbearable, his marriage had ended in divorce, and his enthusiasm for television had evaporated completely. He told producers he wouldn't return for a fourth season under any circumstances. No negotiation, no compromise. Without Taylor, there was no show. The network tried to pitch a retooling, promoting Tig Andrews' Lieutenant Russo to lead character, bringing in a new captain, continuing the format. But Andrews declined. He said The Detectives was Taylor's show, that continuing without him felt dishonest, parasitic. So the network canceled it, quietly, with minimal fanfare. The final episode aired without acknowledgement that it was the finale. No special goodbye, no closure. Just another case solved, fade to black, and the Detectives disappeared from television as abruptly as it had arrived. Taylor moved on to occasional film work, but never returned to television. He'd given 3 years to the medium and gotten nothing back but pain, exhaustion, and a paycheck. After cancellation, the Detectives entered syndication purgatory, airing on random local stations at odd hours, with episodes shown out of order, and sometimes heavily edited to fit shorter time slots. Entire storylines were incomprehensible, because key episodes were skipped. Some stations only aired half the series. Others repeated the same 10 episodes on loop. For decades, the Detectives existed as fragmented television memory, something older viewers remembered watching, but couldn't quite piece back together. It wasn't until home video emerged in the 1980s that the full series became accessible again, and even then, only through expensive collector's sets. Streaming services eventually picked it up in the 2000s. But by then, Robert Taylor had been dead for over 40 years, and the show had been eclipsed by more famous crime dramas. The Detectives became a footnote, a curiosity for TV historians, but largely forgotten by mainstream audiences. Yet, for those who remembered, it remained significant, a bridge between 1940s film noir and modern prestige television, a show that tried to do something different, even when the system fought it every step. Robert Taylor's final interview before his death in 1969 included a rare moment of reflection on The Detectives. He was asked if he regretted doing television, if he felt it had damaged his film career. Taylor paused, then said something unexpected. He admitted that The Detectives was the hardest work he'd ever done, that weekly television demanded more stamina, more consistency, more sheer endurance than any movie he'd made. But he also said it taught him something about himself, that he was tougher than he'd realized, that he could survive being broken down and rebuilt every 7 days for 3 years straight. He didn't call it fulfilling, didn't claim it was his best work, but he acknowledged it mattered. That small admission, buried in a forgotten interview, revealed something true. The Detectives hadn't been easy, hadn't been glamorous, hadn't been what Robert Taylor wanted, but it had been real, honest in ways movies never were, and sometimes that's enough. The show left one final legacy that nobody anticipated. In the early 1980s, a young writer named David Chase was researching police procedurals, studying how they balance serialized character arcs with episodic crime stories. He watched The Detectives obsessively, analyzing how Robert Taylor's weariness built across episodes, how personal demons bled into professional cases. Years later, when Chase created The Sopranos, he cited The Detectives as an influence, particularly how it portrayed a protagonist slowly unraveling under the weight of his job. That lineage, obscure but traceable, connected a forgotten 1959 cop show to one of television's greatest dramas. The Detectives didn't invent prestige TV, but it planted seeds, showed what was possible when you let darkness in, when you stopped pretending heroes were invincible. And decades later, those seeds grew into something extraordinary. After the series ended, the actual gun Robert Taylor used as Captain Holbrook disappeared. It was a cult detective special, the same model carried by real LAPD detectives in the 1950s, and it had appeared in nearly every episode, holstered at Taylor's hip, drawn in tense confrontations, fired in climactic shootouts. The prop department logged it back into inventory after the final day of shooting, but when collectors tried to track it down years later for a television museum exhibit, it was gone. No record of disposal, no transfer paperwork, nothing. Theories emerged. Some believed Taylor took it as a personal souvenir, though his estate had no knowledge of it. Others speculated it was stolen by a crew member, sold to a private collector, lost in Hollywood's black market of memorabilia. The most interesting theory came from a former props assistant who claimed the gun had been real, not a prop, that Taylor insisted on carrying an actual loaded weapon because it made him feel safer during night shoots in dangerous Los Angeles neighborhoods. If true, it meant the Detective's most iconic prop was also potentially illegal, a live firearm on a television set, decades before such things were regulated. The gun was never found, and Captain Holbrook's weapon, like the show itself, vanished into television history, leaving only questions behind.